Good afternoon, colleagues. Warm welcome from me. For those of you who didn't hear my name when I first arrived, it's Helen Martin. I'm one of the directors of the Gateway Alliance. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces, but welcome to our webinar, which is focused around art as part of our curriculum CPD offer through Gateway Alliance. Some of you may have been on our art conference last academic year. And if so, welcome back. And if you're new to this network of art subject leaders and teachers, then welcome. We are going to be obviously online using Zoom, as you know, because you're here. If you've not used Zoom before, there's a couple of things I'll just flag up to you which might be helpful or useful during the session. First of all, as I say, please keep your cameras on if you're happy to. We are recording the session, so you'll be able to refer back to it afterwards. And for colleagues who are just unfortunately not able to attend the session today, they'll be able to watch it back. But if you could keep your microphone on mute during the session, that'll be really handy, so there's no sort of background distractions if there's anything that happens behind you during the session. But obviously, if you want to ask a question, or you've got a comment to make or something to share, then please do unmute your microphone. That's absolutely fine. Some people are using the chat at the moment already. Please do find that. It should be on the menu bar. It's usually at the bottom of your screen, depends what kind of device that you're logging in on. If you click on chat, then you can type into the chat. You can type to everybody, or you can type to specific people in the meeting, press return, and then the message will pop up there. So please do use that. If you click on participants, you should see a little grey box that said hands up. So if you want to pop your hand up, if you've got a question or you just want to sort of share something, then you can use that facility if you want to. In terms of Zoom, I think that's all I need to say. If you've got any problems, put it in the chat and I'll see if I can help you. I'm really delighted that we're joined by Emma Bairstow today to lead our session. Emma works across the country with schools supporting art and design, and has done for many, many years, and has got a huge amount of experience of working with schools in this area. She's got lots to share, and I'm really excited about today because art is my thing. So it's, out of all of the Gateway courses, it's definitely one of my favourites. So I'm really excited about this afternoon. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to hand you over to Emma. We'll talk to you about how the course will progress, because we have got another session, hopefully face-to-face in May. So I'll tell you a bit more about that towards the end of the session. I'll hand straight over to Emma now. So thanks, Emma.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be part of this session, and yeah, to see everybody and meet everybody. So I am going to, the session, the way that it's going to run is I'm going to talk through a lot of images and a lot of slides, and then we're going to have a few breakout drawing activities sort of weaved in between. What would be really great is if you could have some paper and a pencil, and if you've got any other sort of drawing materials around you, like for example some charcoal or pens or colouring pencils. It doesn't matter if you don't have those things, but the more you have, the better, really. But if you've just got paper and pencil, that's also totally fine. So I'm going to talk through some slides, and then if anyone wants to ask me any questions at all, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask me. I might or message on the chat. The only thing with the chat is sometimes when you're in a bit of a flow, I might miss it. So if I do miss your question, either catch me at the end, or just take yourself off Zoom and ask me that way. So I'll start now. I'm just going to share screen. Okay, so can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, great. So just a little bit of an introduction into, make sure I can click through, into my background, like sort of what arts works education is. So I went to art college down in, I got my art degree down in London, and straight coming out of Wimbledon, I got a job in a school called Woodhill Primary down in Greenwich, and worked as a TA, and then that sort of specialised in displays. And like a lot of TAs do, I was kind of given that, because I had an art background, was given that responsibility. And then also thrown in at the deep end, teaching PPA cover art lessons from day one, which was really intense as I had absolutely no experience whatsoever. And but because it was art, they were just kind of like, off you go. And I had a year basically. This was before I started working with Rob Carpenter. I had this year where I was kind of just really finding my own feet with it. I was given some example content to teach from. So I was given the national curriculum, like the example content that they give you with that, of things you could teach. And I was sort of said, oh, off you go, do what you want with them. So one thing that I learned really, really quickly was that the children weren't engaged in the example content from the national curriculum. I remember my first ever lesson was with year 5, and we were making containers out of paper, and using felt tips to like decorate them. And it was literally, and I'd come from a really privileged position of being at art school, so I was really struggling with what I was being given, really. And the children just were not engaged, and behaviour was a real challenge. And I ended up just deciding that I would start linking their artwork to their wider learning. So I was linking it with their literacy books, because they had some really exciting literacy books that they were doing. And it went from there, really. And I did that job for about a year before Rob Carpenter took over the school, who is the CEO of the Inspire Partnership down in London. And I ended up working with them for about 6 years as their art specialist, and working with teachers, team teaching, doing some training after school in art skills, and had more of an artist role in that sense. And then over the last few years, 4 years, I've been back up north, based in Bradford, working sort of for my own company, Artworks Education, with my sister. And we go nationally work across different schools, looking at upskilling teachers in building confidence in their own art skills, doing workshops with children, learning environment, supporting schools with like developing their learning environment, and planning and looking at embedding skills and building skills over time, using the sort of structure that I used to teach with. So I'm going to just share a lot of images, and I'll just talk through them as I go. So why is it important to have a fantastic creative curriculum in school? And I think that one of the main things that stands out for me, and from my own experiences of working with the children, seeing the impact that it had, especially at my starting school down at the Inspire Partnership, Woodhill, these children didn't have a lot of artistic opportunities at that point. It was something that I found I really managed to bond and gel with the children quite quickly, because it was something exciting that they'd not had any experience of really before. And I think what's really great about teaching art in schools is that we don't need to be artists. I have a lot of people have said to me in the past, it must be really easy for you though, because you've got an art degree, to deliver like great art lessons. But it isn't really about that. It's just having the resources for them, having the planning, creating the opportunities for them, because they are just so ready for it. And I think that, I have a 2-year-old, and she has absolutely no problem taking on any sort of artistic activity that I present to her. And I think what happens as we get a little bit older is things start to become more important. We get dragged into maths and literacy learning in a more intense way, and art kind of gets pushed to the side. And I think one thing that I found that I try to push in schools is just trying to hold on to those creative opportunities as much as possible, and how can we interweave it through it all, so that children are getting those experiences throughout primary school. And I think all we have to do is create the space for that as teachers. And I think doing that, we bring out things in our children that really naturally come through creativity, imagination, expression, visual thinking, observational skills, problem solving and analytical skills and autonomy in terms of owning your ideas. I think these things are really, really key life skills that come really naturally through creative working together, exploration, imagination. I think they're all these things that actually are really important for our children going forward. Not to be, create a class of 30 Picassos, but to have a class that, like, this whole child, this idea of creating this whole child that is just like up for it and up for exploring. I think a lot of people think that creativity is about whether you can draw or whether you can paint, and I think that's something that I try to challenge often. It's not really about that. Creativity is about something that you're immersed in. And I think that as a child, when we're early years, say, we kind of, come into school ready for it all and wanting it all, and just open to it all. And I think that, how can we as teachers keep that alive for our children as long as possible? Because I think we don't really know what the landscape of our children's lives are going to look like once they finish school, in terms of what jobs they can get. And, but what we do know is technology is building all the time, and actually you can learn everything on Google, but you can't learn how to be creative on Google. And I think that's what a lot of businesses and a lot of jobs really want. And the way that we learn how to be creative, you're not born with it or you're not. I think that all children are creative. I think that it's about how they're surrounded and how that's sort of developed in them from being a really young child. So where does it begin in terms of building this whole child in school? And in terms of how do we start? What's the starting point in terms of changing the way we look at creativity in schools? I think that mark making and resourcing for freedom to explore is a starting point. Thinking about how our children are just, especially little ones, are just so up for making marks and making a mess. And how many materials can we give them? How big can they work? Just letting them play with it. I remember when I went and did my art foundation at Bradford College after school, and the first thing that they did with us is they gave us a full week of mark making, which I found really interesting because I was 18 and I'd obviously been trained in secondary school to be like a painter, because that's what they like to do at A-level. They make you, I'm sure some of you have probably got A-level art, but my school, it was very much painting and drawing. That's what we did. And it was about making something look like a photograph, which I think is quite wrong, to be honest, but actually that's the way that's how they mark it. So when I went to my art foundation, they literally just smashed that up. They were like, I want you to do all of your art this week using anything but a paintbrush. And we had to go and we were just doing all sorts of stuff, and kind of the messier the better. And I find that that's really interesting when we think about how do we approach art with children, because a lot of the stress that I've come across in my teaching experience with children and art and teachers and art has been about creating something that looks perfect, and thinking that if it's not a good drawing, as in it's not a perfect drawing, or it doesn't look exactly like the object, then it's not like worth anything, it's not good. And that's where we get stuck. I think that it's really important to identify that to develop and learn drawing, it's like learning any skill. It's like learning how to write. If you can learn how to write, you can learn how to draw. It's not that some people can draw and some people can't. It's that they haven't maybe had the opportunities to be open to learn how to do it, because you already think that you're rubbish at it before you get to that point, which is why I think mark making, experimental drawing is so important as a starting point with children. Even in year 6, I start every single term's lessons with an experimental drawing session right at the beginning, because it's reminding them about what is important. And like, obviously it's important to learn how to draw objects, and and all of this stuff. I've put this quote on here: if people knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all, by Michelangelo. His drawings are obviously fantastic, but we haven't seen all of that process that's gone into him learning how to draw like that. And I think that once you allow you have that freedom to explore and make mistakes, then learning how to draw becomes easier in terms of the technical stuff. And some of the other things that I think are really, really important in schools in terms of raising what like your creative curriculum looks like and how to do that. Something that I do in schools, but I think that if you've got a great art lead who can push something like this, you don't need someone like me to come in and do it. Obviously I'd love to, but I think that workshops, big scale stuff, is fantastic, and it's an amazing way of raising expectations of what art looks like in schools. So a lot of children that I've worked with in the past would maybe only think that art is something that they do in their sketchbooks in the classroom, rather than actually how fun, or it's what artists do in galleries. It's not like something, they've not been immersed in like what art can actually look like, what their art can actually look like. And I think doing whole school projects is a really great way of doing this. So this project on screen now, this was a whole school project at a school called Days Lane in London. And this was literally from nursery right through to year 6. And the nursery children and reception children did all the background, massive mess, colouring it all in with the hands, splattering. And then year 1 and 2 came in and they did some stenciling. You can see those little hands on there. We cut the stencils out and they've sponged and printed and added the next layer, and they did mark making on top of what reception and nursery had done. And then year 3 and 4 came in and they were doing bigger shapes and they were doing more stenciling, and year 5 and 6 did some of the more detailed stuff, which was like painting in the outlines and adding in the details and filling in the white sections that you can see on there. I think it's a really great way of, and it was just small groups at the time, groups of 6 children at a time, rotated. It was a really great way of creating a whole school piece. This took a couple of days that had this huge amount of differentiation in it, and everyone could be involved in. If anything, even if the children had only done a tiny little bit on it, it's like, actually, wow, we've been part of that big thing, and that's amazing. Having art, bringing art galleries in, this is another example of raising expectations. So this is the first school that I used to work in, Woodhill Primary, and this was once I started working with Rob Carpenter. I asked him if he would let me bring an art gallery into school, because a lot of the children, even though we were based in London, hadn't been to an art gallery before. And so we got these boards in from eBay and painted them, and I framed a lot of the children's work, and I got a few local artists to exhibit their work as well. And then the children sort of ran the whole thing. So they showed people round, they priced up, a lot of their work was for sale for parents or for anyone that wanted to buy it, and the children sort of just owned the whole night, and it was fantastic, and it was a way of really getting the community excited about what art can look like as well. The next thing I think is a big one in terms of you taking something like this on in your schools is just looking at learning environment, thinking about when you're setting up for your art lesson, do you feel excited by what you can see? Do you feel like you want to get involved with it? And I think this is a space called Scraps in Leeds, and it's crazy, but it's amazing. And when I've been round, I just want to go in and I want to have a go at everything that I can see. It's for early years. But I think that that's something to think about when we walk in our classrooms. How do we feel? Do we want to be exploring in every section? Or, I think that that's something that I support a lot within schools, is looking at how classrooms are laid out and are there different parts of your classroom that make you feel like you just want to go and have a go, or you want to explore a little bit further. And then celebrating the work once they've done it and every part of that journey. So it's thinking about really valuing everything that the children do, from their sketchbook work, which you can photocopy and back, from their colour mixing, and to their sort of final pieces. You'll notice on a few of these displays, this is an art week display, so it's all artwork up there. This is reception, but a few of these displays, they've got canvases in the middle. So and I'll talk through that when we look at learning journeys, but a lot of that is based on, that's one little part of a project that is going on simultaneously to the other bits, the other learning that's going on in class. And I'll talk through that when we look at the teaching backward structure. But I feel like canvases can really like add something central and draw your eye into a display. And it's a really nice way of showcasing that everyone has a little bit of something up on the board. I normally start a canvas with children sort of halfway through a project, and then they just rotate and work on it each art lesson, so that they've all got something that can go up on the board. So one of the things that comes up often with me is when I'm working with new schools and things is things like, what are the barriers for teachers? So in terms of like, I know that for myself, when I first started teaching art, my barriers were resources. The school didn't have any, so it was like we had printer paper and HB pencils for drawing and felt tips basically, and like, so that was something that I needed to challenge as soon as I could, because you can't really expect children to do a decent drawing with a HB pencil because you can't shade with it, and the printer paper's too thin, you can't paint on printer paper. So it's like things like that like that every school will have their own thing. So it might be budget, it might be resources, it might be time. Time is a massive one, I know, for so many teachers, where it's like, how can we actually fit in all these amazing lessons that we want to do? So it's thinking about how that is going to work. And when I show you the breakdown of the plans, it's about making that work for you. And like, you'll see that I work with the idea of six art lessons over a half term, so one a week it could be, but actually it might be that it's easier for you to block those together, or to jiggle them around in a way that fits, and that's something that we can discuss when we go through that in a little while. One of the massive barriers that I find when working with teachers is confidence, and often I think a lot of, so especially working with art leads, a lot of art leads are arty, and they haven't got that sort of same anxiety around teaching art, because you've chosen to be an art lead for a reason. But actually a lot of teachers, and you'll know this as art leads, I'm sure, will be like, well, I can't paint, I've never used watercolour, how am I going to teach a watercolour lesson, or and so I think that that's something that is something that is really worth looking at, is how to upskill our staff so that they feel confident going forward. It might not be that they're going to be upskilled in every single art form, but it might be that level of confidence just needs to be raised slightly so that they're up for taking on new projects. The way that I sort of start that off usually is with experimental drawing, which we're going to be having a go at in a little while. So just looking at what the national curriculum says then, and I'm sure you've all seen this 100 times, but I'm not going to read through it, I'm just going to flick through. But just looking at Key Stage 1 here. So pupils should be taught using to use a range of materials, using drawing, painting, sculpture to develop and share their ideas, experiences and imagination, develop a wide range of art and design techniques in using colour, pattern, texture, line, shape, form and space, and about the work of a range of artists, craft makers and designers. So I think this is so vague, and I think that actually the main thing with this is that the art words here, using colour, pattern, texture, line, shape, form and space, often confuse people, and it becomes, when I look at progression plans with teachers, sometimes we've really focused on those things, whereas they kind of come really naturally. As soon as you start teaching art in like a structured way, or you start looking at, they kind of will do a lot of those even in just today's session. So basically, all I want to say about this is you do not have to worry about covering any of the, well, you do have to worry about covering it, but you don't have to worry about getting this stuff covered in if you're planning art in a decent way, because it will naturally happen. So don't get hung up on this stuff. I think that the main thing with the Key Stage 2 guidelines is that you want to be bringing in sketchbooks. But to be honest, if possible, I would recommend bringing in sketchbooks from year 1. I think that the earlier the better. And year 1 are so ready for sketchbooks, and like a lot of the sketchbooks that I've had with children are actually better in Key Stage 1 than in Key Stage 2, because they've sort of they've started it from that point, and it's just something that I feel like by the time those children get to year 6, they are so fantastic at recording their work and understanding that process, and it's a really natural way of recording progression and meeting every child where they are. I also just want to say, in terms of like the bit at the bottom where it's talking about artists and designers and things, I really do a real mix of artists. So I think it's obviously really important to touch on, you've got your very famous classics like your Picasso and your Monet and your Matisse and everything, but I also think that it's really important to get modern artists in there. I use Pinterest all the time. It's literally, such a lifesaver for me in terms of thinking of ideas for planning and stuff, because I think a lot of the artists that are really traditional and the famous, ones of our time, they're all sort of male, white often, from very wealthy backgrounds, and it's not very inspirational for our children. And I think that although some of their work is fantastic, I think there's equally fantastic stuff in more modern, more relevant current artists that you can just find online. And as long as they've got an awareness of some of the famous artists throughout Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, I really wouldn't worry about it. And if going forward you do end up using the planning structure that I'm going to show you, then you're looking at how many artists a year? You're looking at a lot of artists a year. I can't work it out. So you just don't have to worry about having a really famous artist in there all the time. You might just find someone, it might be an illustrator from a book, or it might be somebody that has done a fantastic painting that really links with the children's learning. So just don't worry about it too much. So this is the structure that I wanted to show you. So it's thinking about down here. So at the side here, I've got the planning support for EYFS. So ignore that it says Key Stage 1 there, because I use Key Stage 1 for the 6-week plan. But for EYFS, I do think that it's a little bit different. Obviously, it's not as structured, and you have a lot more free flow, and you kind of do art a lot more often anyway. So I think in terms of EYFS, it's thinking about how much taking an overarching theme. So if you're doing, say, fairy tales, and you've got 6 texts over that course of that half, or you've got 3 or 4 texts, or however many you have over the course of that half term, thinking about then fairy tales as a theme, or something that links with that, like it could be castles, or it could be woodlands, or something that is quite vague but has a link to fairy tales, and then exploring as many different materials and mediums as you can within that topic, and then what outcome will come from that for your display and for an end piece for your children. But it's kind of led by the work, whereas for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, I use this structure here, which this is set out in weeks. But this is because when I used to teach, so I taught at Woodhill Primary for 6 years, teaching 1 hour a week from every year group in the school. And this is now, I'd call these sessions. So because a lot of schools like to block them together. So you might do session 1 and session 2 in an afternoon, session 3 and session 4 in another afternoon, and session 5 and session 6 in another afternoon, 3 days per half term. Or you might have, your school might allow for an hour a week, or you might do a full day of 3 sessions, something like that. But it's up to you how you want to work it. There's no rules with it. So basically, I look at the half term and I plan with an outcome in mind. So you might say, okay, so this half term we're going to do a painting, and every child is going to create a painting of, let's go for woodland, as that's going to be the theme later. So every child is going to do a painting of a woodland in acrylic paint, or in let's say that. So then session 1, what do they need to be learning about? They're going to be looking at maybe bringing in branches and leaves and woodlandy natural forms into the classroom, so they've got things on tables to draw, and they're going to be doing some experimental drawing, sketching from what they can see, and then maybe they'll do some more structured drawing where they'll look at maybe you'll look at some shading techniques, and then you'll look at how to add texture to their drawings by using shading techniques, something like that. And then in session 2 is looking at an artist or a contextual link. And what I mean by that is, say if you're doing the Greeks and you're doing a Greek art project, then looking at Greek history of art might be enough, and you don't need an artist. And don't worry about having to force an artist to fit every half term if one doesn't, because over the course of the year you will be doing a lot, so you don't need to worry about it. On that second week, I would often look at an artist. I'd do something like a mood board or a drawing. I'd stick a picture of an artist in, and I'd work from their style or something like that. And I've got some examples to share with you in a minute. That's the third session, is an experimental session. So whatever your medium is, so say if you were doing your acrylic painting for your woodland, then you'd be looking at how to mix colours using acrylics on that session, or how to even create different brush strokes and different thicknesses of line. That is another sketchbook session. So the first 3 sessions will be in sketchbooks, and that would be about getting a feel for the material that you're going to be working in. And then session 4 and 5 is looking at developing your outcome. So if it was an acrylic painting, you'd do your base layers. You might have to draw it out first in your sketchbooks, and then you start on your final piece, which is out of sketchbooks. You do your base colours, and then session 5, you're adding in another layer, and then your final session is details, finishing off, and maybe an evaluation if you've got time. I'll go through some images just to break this down again. So this is a project that I've done quite recently at a school in Bradford. So this is the artist that we used here, called Roman Halter. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he did these fantastic paintings that were exhibited at the Imperial War Museum in London. And this was the children's outcomes from year 6. When I was planning this, I had to think, okay, so this is going to be their outcome. It's going to be a watercolor project. What are the steps that are going to lead up to this point? So the starting point, first of all, they did some experimental drawing of faces. So what they did is they just had to look at each other, and they had to use a continuous line to draw each other's faces without taking their pencil off the page. And that was just a really easy 5-minute starter. And then we looked at proportions. You can see an example here. They got them to stick in this picture, and then I broke it down on the board with them, and they looked at how to actually draw a face using the correct proportions. And then the second session, they looked at Roman Halter. They stuck images in of his work. This was done in one session. I feel like you could develop this further. They could have had their own little versions of drawings in the sides here. You could have added some colour into the background. But yeah, I feel like with sketchbooks, what's really important to remember is that you don't have to finish it all in that session. So like if you say your next session, you're doing a painting session, you might not want to work with 30 children using paints all at the same time. So you have half of them continuing with their sketchbooks and half of them painting, and then halfway through you swap them over. That's often what I've done, because I find that after trying painting with 30, or sometimes it's fine, but sometimes your own children, sometimes it's just a bit much. So I use sketchbooks as a holding activity, and they go back and they make sure that their sketchbook stuff is all complete. So session 3 here was experimenting with blue. So they had to do They looked at pastels first, they looked at how to shade and how to create light and dark with pastels, and then they did that with watercolour, looking at how to make different shades of blue with watercolour, adding less and more water. And then they did these line walks here. So they filled the pages with 2 different line walks, and they had to look at the artist, look at the colours that they could see in the artist's work, and add those colours in using watercolour and pastels and colouring pencils as well. And then the session 4, they had to then experiment drawing like Roman halter. So they'd already tried the continuous line where you don't take your pencil off. So it's that same sort of idea, really. I wasn't really strict with it, but they basically had to fill a page, and they just copied from one of his pieces. And then they had to then add little faces in the gaps. And then they went over those lines. They did that in their sketchbooks, and then they did a bigger one on A4 for week 5, or on A3, sorry, where they drew it out, and then they had to go over those lines with glue mixed with PVA glue mixed with some black paint, black poster paint, and they just drizzled it over those lines. It doesn't matter, it didn't matter that it wasn't perfect, and sometimes you could still see the pencil underneath or whatever, but it didn't matter. They just had to sort of go with the flow with it, really. And then once that had dried, week 6, they then added in all their different shades of blue, which you can see at the side, using watercolour, and it's actually very, very quick. And they needed more time for this project. They needed another session after this to finish these off, just so you're aware. And then this was their learning journey. So here you've got their sketchbook work that's been photocopied. You've got they did one on canvas as well. The canvas started week 3. So it was the same skills, just the children rotating on a bigger scale so that they had something bigger to work on. And then they had, they've got some nice pictures of their evaluations and things at the end there. This is another series. This is year 3. So this was at the first school that I used to teach at Woodhill again. So this was the Ice Bear. And they were doing projects on climate change, and they were looking at the book The Ice Bear. So we decided that we'd do polar bear faces, looking at different shades of blue. The starting point was I got them to stick in a picture of a polar bear's face in black and white. You can see up here. And then I got them to add in the ears, the eyes and the nose, and then the jawline, and I modelled it on the board, and it was just basically a triangle, 5 dots, and then a jawline, and then they had to add in the dark using charcoal. And second session, we looked at Van Gogh's Starry Sky, and the way that he paints the texture reminded me of the polar bear fur. That is an example of a really loose artist link that doesn't need to be there. Just so you know, this was a while ago, but I found that when I look back on this now, I see I just totally forced Van Gogh in there for this one. But yeah, they used the little dashes to create the polar bear fur, the texture, and they had drew a line walk, and I gave them 2 shades of blue and black and white, and they had to make different shades and add them into the line walk there. And then their third session was then doing this in their sketchbooks, filling a full page with the lightest blue dashes, and then adding a darker shade of the blue dots again to create that face. And then here you can see that this is the 4 and 5 that they developed it. So they just kept going with another shade of blue, and then they used soft pastel, dark blue pastel, to add in the jawline and add in the shading. And they'd already done that with charcoal before. It's not that different. So they knew how to do that. And I modelled it a little bit at a time with them as we were going along. And then this was the guided group piece that was going on from week 3, the exact same skills. There's nothing different about it. It just went on from week 3, 3 children or 4 children working on it at a time. They won't have done very much on it, but every child was part of it, so that when it went up on the board, they all had a part on that board, basically. The teachers backed some of this work using some of the Van Gogh Starry Sky, some of their writing. They backed that, sort of decorating that, and I will go through some display stuff a little bit later too. And finally, the last structure I'm going to show you, this is just an example of year 1. So I wanted just to make sure that I'd paste it out across the school. So these are my drawings, by the way. But these are a teacher texted me from a school that I used to work at saying that they were doing a rainforest project, and they were doing a book, Save the Orangutans, and that she didn't want to do any more rainforest art because she was sick of it, because that's all she'd done all half term so far. So this was for the following half term. So I suggested orangutan faces, and she was like, with year one, that's going to be horrendous. So I broke it down and I sent her messages. These were picture messages that I sent of like the different steps. So I said the first session would be drawing a close-up of an orangutan face in charcoal or pencil, looking at the texture of the fur and where the eyes and the nose and the mouth go. And then the second session, I missed the artist out for this because I'd learned from the bear one that it didn't need it. And then the second session was looking at mixing different shades of oranges and yellows with watercolour, or just creating light and dark shades of them, because those colours already come in those watercolour palettes. So they basically did dashes of yellow and orange, using less and more water to create lighter and darker lines. They've had to fill a page with that. And then it was adding the features on. So you can see here the eyes, the nose and the mouth. And then a little bit more. And these were my final pieces that I sent her. And then this is what she sent me back after their half term, which I just thought were fantastic, because they totally got it in terms of how they were all really different. But it's amazing what children can do with that structure and with those sort of resources and things. And what I loved that she'd done is she'd photocopied their session 2 or session 3 section, which was the fill in the page, and she'd use that to back their writing on. Okay, so we're going to have a little break for some drawing there. So I thought, because I normally planned our art lessons around Into the Forest, around a literacy text, I thought we'd look at Into the Forest. I'm sure some of you, Key Stage 1 will be familiar with this book. And there's some beautiful, beautiful drawings in this book, and I've done it for across school before, doing just looking at a 6-week drawing project on some of the images from this book. It's a really nice text to start with as a foundation. I thought these were some of the skills that go into a drawing project like that, which I've just leave on the side, and I'm not going to talk through them because I've done a lot of talking through in those, but you can see them there. I thought how we would start is how I would start if I was teaching, which would be to do some experimental drawing. So what I'd like you to do is take a piece of paper and scrunch it into a ball. So a piece of scrap paper, that would be the best thing for now. So you need just a little, anything, just a little ball like that. And I'm going to change my camera here. You should just have a ball of paper. You kind of need just a couple of drawing materials. So I've got a pencil and a pen, and I have a piece of charcoal. Don't worry if you don't have those different things, but as long as you've got a pencil, you're winning, really. So you're just going to have your piece of paper, you're going to look at that, and then I'm going to give you a series of instructions. So they're all going to seem a bit random, but basically what I'd like you to do is create a full page of drawings of your piece of paper. And every time I give you an instruction, you're going to repeat the same, you're going to do a different drawing, but on the same page. So you might end up with a few drawings. I'll just show you. You might end up with a drawing here, another drawing here. It might end up being that it's a real mess, but that doesn't matter, that's the point. So don't worry too much about it. So what we're going to do first of all is I'm going to give you a series. I'm going to give you a first instruction, which is just to sketch your piece of paper freehand. Just sketch what you can see using a pencil. I'm just going to give you 1 minute for each drawing as well. Okay, now I'd like you to swap hands. You're going to use your opposite hand, and you're going to do another drawing of the same piece of paper, but using your other hand somewhere on the page. So using your opposite hand, redrawing the piece of paper. Okay. Now I'd like you to choose a new tool. So another drawing tool, if you've got one. And I would like you to do another drawing using that tool, but I'd like you to double your drawings, the size of your drawing. So your next drawing will be double the size of your other ones. Using a new tool of some kind.
Emma, somebody's just asked whether with this one is with our left or right hand. Is it back to our
with you back to your normal hand? Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, now you're going to go back to your pencil and you're now going to do a new drawing, but using a continuous line, so not taking your pencil off the page at all. See if you can keep your drawings quite big. I know naturally we kind of go small, and I think that's kind of part of the confidence thing. I think see if you can challenge yourself to make it bigger. If you can get as much of the detail in the centre of your piece of paper as you can as well. Okay, now I would like you to use a continuous line in your opposite hand with a new tool. So I've got a pen for mine. I'll do that. What's really nice about this activity, if you do this with children, is it's just a really great chance for them to have a feel of the different materials. So you could have a little pot of paint out, you could have chalk pastels, colouring pencils, charcoals. It's just a great chance for them to have a go at holding them and seeing what they do and how they feel. Okay, just 2 more drawings after this. So your next one, you're going to now, and this feels the most ridiculous, but you're going to close your eyes and you're going to feel the paper and you're going to do a blind drawing. So you're going to draw what you can feel. Okay, and for your last drawing, what I'd like you to do is just position your paper somewhere where you can see it, where you can just focus on the edge of the piece of paper. So what I mean by that is I'm just going to hold this up here, ignore that messy little kitchen in the background. So I want you to focus on the edge of the paper and the shape that's there. I don't know if that reads too well actually, but what I'd like to do, this is called drawing the negative space. So you can choose which material you're going to use. I'm going to use the charcoal because I think that it will stand out more on my page. But I'm just going to draw the outline. So drawing the space, sort of thinking about it, like I'm drawing the space around the paper. So I don't know if you can see.
Emma, we're missing a bit of your sound at some point. It sounds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, most of the time it's fine, but it does sort of fade away. I
think it's when I turn my head, so I'll just keep this way. Is that better?
That's perfect.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
what a nightmare computer. So the negative space is basically the space around the piece of paper. So you're just going to position it somewhere where you can just look at the edge of it and you're just going to draw that edge, that outline shape. So it's not drawing the inside or any of the detail in the centre of the paper, it's just following that outline edge. That's your last drawing, and use whichever material you want for that. Okay, and when that's it then. So when you've done, just give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So the point of that activity is basically to just have, it's kind of understanding, giving the children a chance to explore different materials, understand that like a good drawing is something that you learn from. It's not about creating something that looks perfect. And this activity actually like eliminates the chances of doing something that looks perfect, because they're having to draw on top, they're having to draw bigger than they'd naturally want to. It's just creating little challenges like that to break down some of those preconceptions of what a good drawing is. I found it really, really useful with all sorts of different materials. So if I'm doing a project where I've ended up doing flower painting, so these ones here, this is project again at Woodhill years ago now, but this was with year 2 when we were doing Georgia O'Keeffe flowers, and the starting point here was bringing flowers into the classroom and sketching them in funny ways. So making them do it with their other hand, making them doing them as big as they could, using different materials, felt tips, charcoals, whatever you have, and kind of as a starter, and it might take 10 minutes, but it changes the atmosphere about if you just give them a piece of paper and tell them to sketch from a photograph or sketch from a flower on their desk. That is when you get the tiny little drawings with the crosses through them. I'm sure you've probably all experienced that. I've experienced it maybe 1,000 times, where they'll draw tiny and then they'll put a cross through it and then they'll want to start a new page, and it's just like, no. It, you know, or they want to rip the page out, or it just gets rid of that, and you're starting off saying, okay, so this is what a good drawing can look like. And yeah, you might not think it's good, but I know, you know, you have learned a lot from that drawing, from those different drawings. So you could do it with paper cups, you could do it with flowers, fruits, anything. And then from that, your next part of that session then might be looking at the outline and looking at actually drawing what you can see, which is the next really important thing with learning how to draw, is the importance of looking and actually like looking at that shape. And that last one we did, which I mentioned the negative space, is how sometimes it's great to learn how to look at something as a shape rather than as the object, because we naturally make things up. So if we're drawing a picture of a flower, we might just draw, what you'll find is children will look at it and they'll start to draw it, and then they'll just start making it up, and you'll get the classic flower shape that looks like a 4-leaf clover, no matter what the picture is that you've given them, or the real flower on their table, because we just naturally do it. I do it as well. Like, it's like we just kind of get lazy and start just doing what we think, and that is fine. And I do think that there is an importance of letting children have the freedom to sort of play and use their imaginations and stuff. But in terms of like learning how to draw, you do want to be able to teach them these skills in terms of looking at an object and drawing what they can see. A way that I have found useful in teaching that is, so this picture on the board here of this girl drawing. So so for this project, they'd already done some drawings as a starter, of drawings of flowers on tables, and we went to Greenwich Park before we started this project, and the whole of year 2 went on a trip to Greenwich Park, and we took loads of photos on cameras of flowers close up, and then we printed those off on A4, and then I got them to use an oil pastel and go around the edge of their flower shape. So they went round the edge of their shape with an oil pastel, and what that did is that defined that, like outlined that edge. And so it was almost like, so the negative space is basically the space around the object. So they were kind of outlining that space, and then they had to copy that shape onto their piece of paper. And what I find with that, and so they were like literally then looking at the line that they'd drawn, rather than drawing a rose, she was looking at the line of the shape, and these were some of the outcomes. I'm not sure which one was hers in the end. It wasn't that one, but it was one of these, maybe that big one, but it was different to the photographs. But actually what I loved about them was that every single child had really looked. You can see even some of the ones here, they had looked at the shape of the petals, and they're all different. and I just thought they were fantastic in terms of looking at those drawing skills. They'd really looked at the shape, which is what we were focusing on. And the rest of this project was looking at watercolour, and they had to look at how to make different shades of reds and pinks using less and more water, and different shades of greens using less and more water. And then they had to add those into their big flower drawings a little bit later down the line. We used Georgia O'Keeffe as an artist influence for that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at, so from, in terms of like building on those drawing skills, so we've done experimental drawing, we've spoken through the importance of looking at a shape and like the negative space. If you're going to do a drawing lesson, that's a really good starting point, thinking about looking at shape and looking at an outline, and you know, how do they really draw something that they can see. And then after that, you might want to make something look more realistic, or give it a texture, or make it look 3D by adding in tone and shade. So we're going to go through these now. Some of you might have come across these before, so don't feel like you have to do this with me if you've done it already and you're really familiar, but I am going to put the visualizer back on, and I'm going to go through each one, and I'm going to draw a circle and turn the circle into a sphere by adding dark shadow to it. Okay, can you see that okay? Can you see that okay? Yeah?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
So I'm going to do this in charcoal because it's quick. You do it in whatever tool you want to do it in. So I'm going to start off. So I am going to be turning my head a little bit here. So if you can't hear me, don't worry. I'll be writing it down as I do it as well. So the first one I'm going to do is hatching. Okay, so I'm going to start off drawing a circle like this, and I'm going to draw lines going in this direction. So I'm going to draw as if the light is coming from here. Okay, so the shadows is going to be around here. So I'm going to, so hatching is just lines in one direction. Okay, and then overlapping each other for where the darker bits are, and then stretching them out and spacing them out for where it gets lighter. So this is really good fine motor for the children as well, because they have to be pressing and lifting, pressing and lifting. And then as you get up to where the light is, you won't put any lines there. And then you can go back into your edges to make them darker down the side. Okay, so that's hatching there. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is cross hatching. Okay, funny looking circle, but whatever. Okay, so cross hatching is quite similar. I'm going to go direction, but lots of different directions, but it's just using lines again. So I'm going to start off at here. I'm going to work my way up to the other side. So a bit like this. So I start off quite dark. And then I'm now lifting my hand. Children really do find this a challenge, lifting the hand in this way, because they just automatically press really hard, and I just think it's something that develops over time. And then I'm coming back in to fill in some of the darker areas. Okay, so I've got cross hatching there. I'll just label these. Okay. The next one is going to be contour shading, which is where you shade in the shape of the object. So this is a circle, so I'm going to kind of drag, it's going to be circular movements like this. And I'm lifting my hand off when I get up to that point up there where the light is, and then I'm pressing on down here for the darker areas. Okay. Contour shading is a great one for doing like sculptural drawings. So if you're doing like a sculpture project, and you want to do some designs for them, this is a bit like the continuous line drawing. Like I didn't take my charcoal off at all there. It's a really great one for creating shape. You're probably all familiar with the artist Henry Moore, but he does beautiful. He has tons of contour drawings online that you can look at, which are, and then he's obviously a sculptor, so he's a great one. I've got some images to share with you based on his work a little bit later. So that's contour shading. Okay. And then after that, you've got stippling, which is using dots. And I'm not going to do the whole thing, should be here all evening, but it's little dots like this and then overlapping them to create darker area and then lifting them off to create a lighter area like that. That's stippling, and you do it really gradually. This is a great one for like textures for things. So you might shade something, generally shade it, like blend it, the whole thing, and then you might add stippling on top later to create texture. Okay, and then the last two. So this one is going to be scumbling, which I think is a Bradford word. So feel free to find another word for it. But it's a little bit like scribbling. So you're swirling your charcoal round like this. And you're creating like little spirals, and you lift your hand off as you get up to the lighter line. It's a really nice one for doing like trees and things and leaves on trees. Like I find that obviously if you ever do tree drawing with children and you end up having that sort of broccoli head tree, instead of getting them to actually draw the leaves like that, get them to just scumble on the end of branches, and it looks really realistic. And then the last one is blending. There is others of these, but these are the ones that I use in schools. Blending is the really gradual change from one shade, from one tone to another. So with charcoal, it's quite easy because you can use your finger to smudge it. But it's a little bit like I'm just going to gradually shade this edge here, and then I'm going to slowly lift my hand off and take just spread out the charcoal a little bit, and then I'm going to use my finger to smudge it in, and you'll find that it goes very grey, and then you need to go back in to add your darker edging. So the blending's very soft, and it's quite a good one when it comes to looking at like an overall grey on something, and then you might add some of the other ones in on top. Okay, could you hear me all right for those?
Yeah, we could hear you well. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
My daughter came home and talked about scumbling the other day.
Did she? Okay, maybe it's not Bradford. Yeah. It's so funny because at Bradford College they use that word, and then I've never heard it since. And I go around schools always saying it, and everyone's like, "What?" I'm like, I don't know where it's from.
Pop in the chat, anybody, if you've ever heard of scumbling. Perhaps it's something that I've just not heard.
I have googled it, and it does come up sometimes, but then it's got other names, like adjacent lines is another one for it. And so I think whatever works for you guys, scribbling as well could work as well.
Oh, so, good. There's a couple of people in the chat that have used it, so that's good.
That's good.
Emma, okay. Just Rowena in the chat, just whilst I've got you now, was just asking, could you share some of these images as something I can show to year one teachers to look at flowers with Georgia O'Keeffe? I think the last bit that you talked about with the flowers, the large flower drawing.
Yeah, that's fine. What is in like just you want a copy of the presentation?
Rowena, do you want to unmute if you can and just let us know what you're after. Or maybe we can have a chat at the end.
Welcome to take photos of these or anything. You're not on the right thing. Sorry, let me just get you off. Can you see my screen?
We can see those slides.
That's good.
Rowena doesn't have a microphone. But she said, I don't mind if it's the slides or just one. So there's a picture that you can grab a screenshot, or we'll send you the slides, and then you've got that there. Thank
That's
you.
Fine. Great. So I'll just keep going then. So
thanks.
So this is just an example now of maybe, say, if we were doing Into the Forest, and I was thinking if we do have time today, we will have a go at this, but I'm just thinking we'll see how we get on. But yeah, this is the next step for this project. So I would look at how to create distance in a drawing. So you would then think about like creating a really light shaded background. This is using charcoal, and then what's the background, the middle ground, and the foreground. So you've got pale trees in the background, then slightly darker, and then bigger, darker trees in the foreground. That creates that distance. And when this will be the next thing that they would do if you were going to do a drawing project on Into the Forest, say, would be then starting off creating a background, really pale trees, and then medium trees, and then big dark trees in the foreground, and then those trees in the foreground are the ones that maybe then you'd use all your shading techniques to add the details in afterwards. So thinking about sketchbooks then, and thinking about how to lay out sketchbooks. Sketchbooks are something that I've found through my teaching career a bit of a battle, to be honest, and something that I think is a work in progress. And I think that actually what I've learned is that children, sort of the more structure they're given with their sketchbooks, the better, in terms of maybe modelling with them. So sort of showing them how your sketchbook should be something that is something of a piece of joy, really. It should be something that they're proud of and respected, as similarly to how they would respect like their literacy book. I found that it is the most natural way of recording progression that there is, in terms of like one of my things that I do quite often in schools is I'll look at progression files with teachers, and I find that I find them quite difficult. They challenge me quite a lot, because I think that, in terms of every child is different, and depending on how much art background they've had, they're all going to be at a different point. And I think you can't really put, say, by this point they should have done X, Y, and Z, and by this point. But I get why they're important, but I do think that what's really, really great is being able to have like a really honest and natural record of their progression. If you're teaching in that sort of structure, and you say you're doing your first 3-4 sessions in sketchbooks, by the time that and your sketchbooks roll on, so that they often, if you get like a better quality sketchbook with proper decent paper, cartridge paper in it, and they're a bit thicker, they can take them up with them to the next year, and then you get their new sketchbook when they're ready for it. And by the time they're in year 6, you're going to have an amazing record of how they've progressed over time. So that's just my opinion on it. But I also do think that obviously your progression files, and if I know that as art leads that be something that you think about and will have to do, I'm always happy to chat through those. I've seen some really hard going ones, and I've seen some fantastic ones in my work. And actually, as a company, we are developing a template for one at the moment, which, if anyone is interested in looking at that, it will be done very soon. So I'm happy to sort of pass that on. I do have an example of one that I'm going to share with you that I worked with a school shared it with me the other day, and it's one of the most simple ones that I've seen, which I thought was fantastic, because I do think in the simpler the better, because we get hung up on all the jargon and it's just too complicated. So these are just some examples of some sketchbooks. These are year 1 at a school that I used to teach at called Jerry Clay in Wakefield. So this was their first session. So their project was these dragon eyes. So they were doing dragons and castles as their theme. And and their book was linked to that. So we started off doing shading techniques. So they looked at drawing the circles and then adding, like just like we've just done now. And I think even in year one they can cope with it. And then they had to draw their eye, and then they had to add in their different shading techniques to create texture around in the scales. And they looked at photographs of lizards for that as well. And then their project was, well, these were their outcomes. They were these little dragon eyes and they did a big one as well on a canvas, but these were their individual ones. So what they had to do is they had to build up lots of little pieces around. They drew an eye shape on their piece of card, and then using card, they built up it's called a relief. So they were adding little pieces of card all around their eyes to build up the texture. And that took a couple of lessons for that. And then they painted them and added the details in for their, like, a little bit later, and that sort of, those were their outcomes there. And another example of some sketchbook structure here. So this was a project with year 3 at the same school, Jerry Clay, and they were doing, we were looking at fish. They were doing an under the sea theme for theirs. So we're looking at fish. I started off printing off these fish eye pictures, and I was talking about the light and the dark. And then I got them to draw a line walk, because they'd already practiced their shading techniques in year 2, this class. So we just touched on them, and then I got them to draw a line walk, which was a really nice way of them doing those shading techniques in different shapes. And then they had to add the different shading techniques into their line walk. And then we looked at an image of a fish side profile, and they had to copy that negative space, that shape around the fish, and fill their whole page, and then add their different shading techniques into the different scales. So that was a couple of sessions. That was something that, well, it was one session, but then it was something that whenever they just kept coming back to. So they'd maybe do some painting, and then they'd come back to that as a break. Or if I didn't want to do that, this project was very, very messy in the end. So it ended up being that I'd work with half the class would be painting and mark making, and half the class would be doing their adding in back into their fish. And then they looked at how to make, the artist was called Sharon Cummings. I'll show you. I don't have an image of her work actually, but she's basically got some really amazing pieces of art. She's got one that I've used loads in different schools, which is this side profile of this fish, and it's like a mark making background, and then like a black fish outline on top. So they basically had to practice their fish drawing with black ink on a page, and then they had to do a mark making background as their outcome, and then add their fish drawing on top of that. And then eventually they then wrote their evaluation around their fish drawing, which I thought was quite nice. The teacher did that with them. In terms of evaluating, these are some of the things that I just use to generate conversations around it with the children. It might be that evaluating is just something as simple as going back through their sketchbooks, through their learning journey, and getting them to just annotate their sketchbook. If you don't have time to do a full paragraph or full page of, what we've been learning about, I feel like going through their sketchbook and looking back at their first drawing lesson and reminding them what they did, asking them what they did, and then getting them to make a few notes, and then going back through, then they're looking at their artist lesson and then their experimentation, just making a few notes, and then maybe they write a tiny little bit at the end. Maybe you could even stick a photo in of their end piece or a photocopy of their end piece and say, and then this is how we finished our project off. I think that's a really nice way of doing it. Obviously you could write a full page of an evaluation if you had time to do that, or a full paragraph or whatever. So I think we are going to have time to do I've got lots of learning environment stuff to share with you, but I thought before we get onto that, I think we do have time to do just develop that little sketching project a little bit further. So I am going to do that with you quickly, and then you can either take part in it or you can just watch what I do and just take it in. It's totally up to you. So I'm just going to come off this and come back. Okay, so can you see my screen there?
Yeah.
So we're going to look, I'm going to show you that woodland scene, okay? So, because I do think, because this is something that is, sorry, I'm squeaking on my chair. I'm sat on my daughter's booster seat. It's very funny. So yeah, I've only got a little tiny bit of charcoal left. So I'm going to do it in pencil. So this is something that can be used for, you could do cityscapes with it, you could do landscapes with it, forest obviously, but it's a really great, I'm just going to plug in my laptop. It's a really great way of showing distance in something. So it's thinking about that foreground, middle ground and background, and it's just a great thing to teach them because it comes in again and again and again without.
Oh, Emma, I think we've lost you.
Oh, I'm here. Hi. We're back. Sorry, my laptop was dying, so I just plugged it in.
Oh,
right. So
Maria's just asked what grade pencil you'd start with.
So I've just found some charcoal, so I'm going to do it with that. But actually, I think in terms of grades of pencil, I was just about to use a 4B. I think 2Bs and 4Bs are really nice, but like anything above a 2B basically is good. I think like you know is the dark. You might want to start with a lighter one to do the background, and then and get darker as you get to the front. So you just want to avoid the HBs, H's, really. But yeah. Okay. So the starting point for this then, I'm just going to do like use the side of my charcoal, and I'm going to do just to get rid of the white. Okay. You're welcome to do this with me as well if you want. Obviously, if you're using pencil, don't worry too much about doing this. This is just in the luxury of having charcoal. It just makes it a bit easier to get rid of the white. Okay. And then I'm going to start off adding some really pale trees in the background. So I'm going to start halfway on my page because the trees, they're not going to come right from the bottom. So I'm just going to draw upwards like this. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just drawing little lines to begin with, just going up like this. Okay. Pale lines. I'm just going to drag my finger down those lines like that. Okay. And then I'm going to make those trees stand out a little bit more. So, but I want them to be pale. I'm going to put one in a different direction there. I'm going to go across like that there. So that's going to be my background. Okay, now I'm going to do the middle ground. So these are going to be slightly darker and a little bit bigger. So, okay, so there's one there. I'm going to bring one of them a little bit further down. So that one might come here. Might do a little branch that comes off here. I'm going to do another one up here. Okay, I don't know if you can see. I'll stretch it. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And another one that comes up here. So this is going to be my middle ground trees there. And I'm just going to dash in the middle of these with my charcoal like that, a bit of hatching in the middle. And then I'm going to use my finger to smudge those. Another one here. Okay. Now I'm going to start doing my more foreground trees. So I'm going to do one that's really big. Here like that. Okay, I'm going to do another one that's a little bit smaller, but it's going to be, it's overlapping some of my other trees as well. Doesn't matter. Okay, and another one that's just coming off the edge here. And then I'm going to shade those in quite a lot darker. I'm still doing hatching here. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's with charcoal. If you're doing this with pencil as well, use your pencil. You can use your pencil on the side to create that same sort of effect. especially if it's a sort of darker one. And then I'm going to smudge that with my fingers like this. Might need to add a bit more in. And then I think, like, you know, you've just done the shading techniques, so what could be nice is just to add a bit darker to one of the edges of the trees. That in. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm now looking at the rest of it and I'm thinking, well, that's way too light there. So I'm just going to darken my middle ground slightly just to make them so they're not so light. At this point, don't worry about the bottoms of the trees. Okay, so my middle ground's a little bit darker now. Could still give them an edge, still give them a slightly darker edge. And then my background trees, you might want to just go over those as well, just a tiny bit, just to bring them out, or even add more in. So background trees here, I'm just going to push those in. And then along the bottom of my woodland now, I'm just on the bottoms of the trees, I'm just going to use my charcoal, just going to do a bit of scumbling around the bottoms of them like this, just to create the look of the forest floor. And it's going to get a bit fainter, just adding a couple of extra little trees into the background and defining the edges of my big trees. And then just, using the scumbling to do the forest floor. And then I'm just going to tap that, just blend that in a little bit with my finger. Okay. And you can just keep going with it. So you can keep adding. What happens with charcoal and pencil is it all starts to look very grey after a while. You just have to keep going and just bringing out your darkest bits, which will then like reveal the lightest bits of those trees. You can always use a rubber as well to bring out any of the really light bits that you have on there as well. So what you should have is three obvious sections of light and dark. So where your foreground is the darkest, and you might have then, you could add your details in there, you could add your little bits of cross hatching and your stippling to add some of the texture on those trees at the front. Okay, so you get the idea there. So have a little go if you've not done already. And I just think that it's obviously I've done this for trees here, but it's something that is great for. I've done it with cityscapes and landscapes, just looking at hills in the distance and jungles and all sorts of stuff. So it does come in really handy. For lots and lots of different projects, and it's just a really great thing for them to learn about how to create distance in a drawing like that. Okay, I'll just come off. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna have a little, just talk you through some learning environment things just for the last 15 minutes, and then we're going to just look at your filling in your poll for what you'd like to do next time and have a little bit of a chat with anybody that wants to have a chat about that for next time. So I'm just having, so I'll just share with you some learning environment things. So what you'll see on these are on a lot of these displays, a lot of them have very neutral, got very neutral backgrounds. That is something that Rob Carpenter brought into my life when he started working at Woodhill, and it was something that that was got a really mixed response. These sort of Hessian or neutral backgrounds. I think that it is a fantastic way of what am I trying to say? A fantastic way of showcasing the children's work, rather than what happens is if you've got a really, really bright background you can lose the work on top of it. So it's a great way of getting the work to just stand out and it be a focus on that rather than a focus on what's going on in the background. What I think is really lovely about some of the nicest displays that I've seen in schools is showcasing the art and the literacy together. Having like an element of consistency across the school, but I totally get that every teacher has their own way of doing things and that you want to bring sometimes you want to bring part of yourself to those displays. I think that's something to bear in mind as well. But I do think you'll notice a lot of these displays are quite consistent, and that's because I've worked closely with these schools in terms of how to do this, but I'm not saying that this is the right way to do it. This is just a way that has worked for me. So take what little bits you like out of these and use and discard any bits that don't feel relevant to the way that you do things in your school, because I know that every school is different. You will notice in all of these, in a lot of these displays, they've each one will have a little context that's written by the teacher, which is just a little breakdown of what they've done this half term. They'll usually have literacy and art on there. This doesn't, because this is a nursery display. So they've got their drawings on there and little bits of mark making. But most of them will have a handmade title. I started encouraging handmade titles because I was the person that was in charge of displays at Woodhill, and I was so sick to death of cutting out lettering from Twinkle and double backing it. And I used to spend about an hour making a title, and then the realization that actually you could just use a fancy pen and do something really easy was just a literal revelation. And I found that's been something that people have loved in schools that I've worked with, because it's just so simple and it takes such a short amount of time. A lot of the pieces on here will be double backed. This one here is at a school that I work at quite regularly in Doncaster called Tollbar Primary. This project, I planned this with the teacher and she did it, but they did these printmaking canvases here, and each child did one little figure on a piece of polystyrene, and then they were repeat printed onto tea stain paper, and then they photocopied the canvases, went in the photocopier, just really like a bit of the canvas went in the photocopier, and then they used that for backing for their writing. And this school like to leave quite a big border, which I think is quite nice. It kind of just sort of brings things together, but that's not, a rule. This title here, they again used the canvas, photocopy of the canvas, and they made the first letter of each word, and then the rest was written in gold pen. They've got their context in the middle here. These are little keywords which are about their literacy. And then they've got photographs of other parts of the project that they've been doing. This was pupil voice. These little speech bubbles are pupil voice. And then what else have they got on there? Yeah, they've got quite a lot of pupil voice, quite a lot of writing, and a context down there. And this is the same school, their early years. So they had they put the title in the middle here, very simple title. And they just showed their mark making, but they still had what I mean by the consistency. They still had the context, they still had the keywords, they'd still backed everything really beautifully. And I think they'd printed off some, I probably would have used photocopies of their artwork for the backing here, because that's what I usually do, but they've actually printed off some fruit wallpaper, I think, and they've used that for the backing, which I think also looks really nice. They've also used fabric here to just sort of soften it a little bit. I often hang fabric in schools and pin things on it and just make it look, you can peg little keywords into that or use that for photographs or string some lights on there or something that always just really brings it out, gives it like another level. This is the project I wanted to talk to you about in terms of the contour drawing. So this is Jerry Clay School again. This was a project that I did with Year 5 there, the art project. And this was a lot of contour drawing. This is World War II. So Henry Moore, if you're doing a project on World War II at all, he has some fantastic underground people sheltering in the underground during World War II. He has some fantastic drawings of that. and he uses lots and lots of line, and he creates, like, his people are more like sculptural shapes rather than people, and I just thought it was really interesting. Year 5 loved it. And you can see they've got the whole art journey up here, and then they did the keywords using little planes, and then the title was done with charcoal and using photocopies of their artwork, and everything's just backed quite simply. You'll notice on some of the writing in some of these schools, and I think this is not everybody's cup of tea at all, but I really like it, where they use that sort of high illuminated first letter. That's something that, if you are going to do that, you'd use your line guide for their writing, and you just basically mark out an area where they're not going to write, and then you have whatever you want to go in there. The children can do it. So at this school, the children cut out their little archway and they wrote in a silver pen their first letter of their writing on there, which I thought was a really nice effect. This is a project from in year 2, looking at relief trees as their outcome on this canvas. But most of their art learning here was looking at mixing different shades of green and mark making. So they were looking at how to draw trees but not using paintbrushes, and using different tools to create leaves and branches and things like that. And they did lots of different mixings of greens and lots of different mixings of browns. And then for their sort of class piece, basically, they did loads of mark making greens in the background, and then loads of mark making on brown card, which was then cut into strips, and then they built it up like a forest. I wasn't part of that last piece there. I was just part of the planning of it. I do have some more displays to share with you, actually, so if you just hold on one moment.
Whilst Emma's just looking at those, colleagues, if you've got any questions about anything that Emma's been talking about today, please do pop them in the chat or have a think, and then towards the end we'll be able to take some of your questions if you've got anything in terms of the activities or some of the examples that Emma's shared, or some of the planning examples or displays that she shared as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, because I think that in terms of, let me just come back to you, just find, with the displays, it's something that I try and encourage teachers to plan their displays like they would when they're planning their art at the start of the half term. Plan their displays then, just so it doesn't matter if it doesn't if it changes or anything, but it just helps you visualize it and then know what you want it to look like, what you want your end pieces to look like, and then it can support your plan. You can get all your resources in, and then in terms of having like loads to do at the end of your half term, then to put up your display, you can just do it gradually as you get things finished. You can photocopy bits, or you can make your keywords when you know it's something that can be a bit of a process. I'm just reading some of the comments here. When you're creating these displays.
So I think the first one was Claire Payne. Should we be worried if we don't do as much 3D sculpture work? We mainly paint, draw and collage.
I think, I don't think you need to be worried at all. I just think it's something that maybe when you're thinking about taking it forward, what your next steps might be, you do want to get some sculpture in there, but you don't have to stress about it. It doesn't even have to be anything mega. It might be trying some relief, just trying something simply like, I find relief collage so great to do with children. Cardboard cutting is obviously quite hard, but what you can do with a relief piece is you can build it up like a painting, but it is a sculpture, so it's quite nice because you can, especially if your children have done quite a lot of painting, you can sort of paint on big pieces of cardboard, and then the teachers can cut out, and you can support in building and layering, and you can create some fantastic canvases through that. But yeah, there's lots of really accessible sculpture projects, and sculpture might be something that if you want to do in the next session with me, because that's something, there's loads of really accessible, easy sculpture, but it's something that people do shy away from because it's like, where do we start?
I was thinking that, Emma, it could be something that we'll look at the next time. If people, we're going to do a poll in a minute and ask you which aspects of art you wanted to focus on in the next session.
I've got a few more displays to show you. Do you want to look at those, or do you want to do the poll? How are we doing for time?
We're
Got a
all right
couple
at the
more.
moment.
Yeah,
Perhaps we'll do a couple of displays and then some more of these questions, and then we'll just run
yeah,
quickly.
that's fine. So let me just come onto here. Sorry. Oops. Sorry, what am I doing here? Right. I think I've just deleted that one. Oh, here we go. Right, so slideshow.
Whilst you're just bringing that up, Emma, Steph was just asking, when you're creating these displays, would you have a separate board for the previous topic to fill with art and literacy, etc., and then a board for the current topic to use as a working wall, or how would you do it?
So normally when I was teaching more full time, what I did is I'd have a wall. How I'd support teachers with this would be that every half term they aim to do a new display board. So it would be either in their classroom or out in a communal area. And if it was out in the communal area, they'd team up across. So that school, Wood Hill, was a 3-form entry school. So they'd do one board, the 3 classes combining their work together because they'd share the planning. And then the next half term they'd do one board in their room, and they'd, over time, all the boards across school would be changed. But then the following, I had personally had art working walls when I had a classroom there, and I had art working walls as well. But teachers, they would have a working wall, but it would be it wasn't like a formal thing, that it was that they'd use it for lots and lots of different things. But yeah, in terms of like changing over the displays, you wouldn't put a new display up until you had all the work, and then you'd change it. And it might be that your last half term's work board would still be up, but somewhere else in school or something like that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Is that okay, Steph?
Just on to here.
Yeah, I think we'll.
Can you see my this display that's on there now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions on that? I'm going to just talk through these last couple. But if anyone does have any, obviously, I think it's really good to go through this stuff.
Yeah, no, we can share a few more questions at the end. So
yeah, that's fine. So this one here was Beowulf project. So the reason why I wanted to share these with you is because there's some just quite nice art ideas for projects, really, rather than, as well as the displays are lovely, and obviously it's nice to see them together with the literacy, but I want to give you as many art ideas for projects as possible. So this was an artist called Tim Jeffs, who's fantastic. They were looking at pencil drawings of lizards, and then they developed them into dragons based on Beowulf, and they're like Viking project. And this was a full 6-week drawing project, and it was fantastic. But it was year 4. By sort of week 4, 5 of them developing these drawings, they really needed. It was like a bit of a resilience project, because drawing for that amount of time is quite hard. So what I had is lots of different little, they could do some, and then they came back to sketchbooks and worked in the books, and they could we sort of broke those lessons down in a slightly different way, just to give them that bit of time of rest, really, because it was a lot of drawing. But they did fantastic, and the outcomes are amazing. You can see some of the year 2s added their eyes into the display on the edge here that I shared with you earlier. This is a project that I used an artist called Ed Mel for this. So this is year 6. This is a book, Holes, which I'm sure a lot of you know of. So what we did here, this artist does some fantastic desert landscapes. So it's very similar to like the skills that we've just done this morning as a starting point, looking at foreground, middle ground and background. And then this was a collage project. So they basically built up those different layers in different pieces of coloured card, and then they added in light and dark using pastels on top. They didn't do a canvas for this one, and they all did these little drawings on little pieces on A4, and then we just blew it up on the photocopier, which is a nice way of creating that centerpiece if you wanted that. They also put lots of their little pieces into the photocopier and used that as the backing, which you can see there. That's a few different pieces of their artwork that is used for the backing there. and they used lizards for the keywords, and they had little photos and things. Yeah. This is a tin forest. So this was a fantastic drawing project, as well as this was a nice little sculptural project. They ended up doing some tinfoil sculpture, but their drawings were just beautiful, using different grey scale watercolour. So they just used black and pencil drawings, and then they used black watercolour with lots of water to make different shades, and then they created these lovely little leaf drawings, and then they had to do those drawings in glue, quite thick glue onto card, and then they were covered in tinfoil, and then they were stained with some shoe polish and some and a little bit of paint sponged on to make it look like it's been like weathered, which is a really lovely little project. And they were really abstract, those pieces. You could do them with string as well, and you kind of rub the tinfoil over the top so that the image comes out, and then you can stain it. I mean, it doesn't matter if they look abstract. So when you put them together like this sort of tiled effect, it just looked fantastic. I love how they made the title here. Obviously, that is a little bit more time consuming, so I probably wouldn't be doing that in a school, but they've done a fantastic job. This is at Wood Hill again, so I just work there on more of a consultancy basis now, and my sister takes on more of that role. But this is just a lovely piece. I shared this one earlier, so that's an art week display. So that was a big celebration of the work that the whole of reception had done over their art week. This is a quite in terms of sculpture, they were doing it under the sea. This is Foxfield, which is also part of the Inspire partnership, and these were made using kitchen roll holders, and then they were either taped together to make long ones, or they were cut to make short ones, and they were paper mache'd and then painted, and then that bottom section there is just scrunched, that thick brown paper that you can get sometimes in packaging, scrunched up and then sponge painted, and it was all just stuck together. And then they did some dyeing of paper. This was also for their art week. So these art weeks are something as well that we can look at. If you wanted to, let me know in the feedback. That's something that I help plan in schools, is a big whole school push, which would be basically the same structure that what we've spoken about, but done over a course of a week with a big outcome in mind, with a specific theme. Like, I've planned lots on colour, on the global themes, like sustainability and things like that, and you can really push a big theme in your school and really raise the expectations of art, and everyone could produce a display at the end. So it's something that but it does need a lot of support for teachers, so in terms of like the guidance of how that week could look, but that's something that we could discuss in the next session if you wanted, because I've done quite a few different ones of those. This was a lovely project looking at butterflies. So their outcomes were actually these close-up watercolour butterfly paintings, but then they were photocopied to make this centrepiece, which were just photocopies of their butterflies, then cut out, and they basically drew around a template of a black card butterfly cut out there from their piece and stuck it on top, and then they just added it onto their canvas, which was just it's kind of like a celebration of the work that they've done as a centerpiece. But the learning journey stuff was these butterfly close-ups. We've been through that one, and that's it. So
shall I fire some questions at you then, Emma?
Yeah, of course.
Fire answers. So can you recommend a good guide for developing drawing skills across the year groups to develop progression of skills? National curriculum is so vague.
I'd say it's tricky. I'd say basically just in terms of thinking about it across the year groups, I would maybe think about having something that is like just keep it really, really basic. So your starting point, so I've spoken a little bit about those different steps. So your experimental drawing, your shading techniques, you're looking at the outline in negative space. I think those things as a starting point, and then if you're starting with those things from year one, naturally you're going to get loads of progression. They're going to naturally start using those things really easily. By the time they're in year 3, they're going to be naturally taking up more space on the page. There's lots of things, like I don't have anything specific to recommend as in like a file or anything that has this broken down, but I just think in my experience, I think like having some really, maybe starting as drawing is like absolutely the foundation really to a lot of these other art forms. It comes into painting, it comes into sculpture, it comes into print, it comes into everything. So I think like just keeping it super basic, thinking about experimenting and building confidence, looking at objects and drawing what you can see and taking up space, like getting children to make big drawings and fill up space in their sketchbooks. That's something that I found a constant battle, is trying to get children to go big. And you might find that naturally you've done it as well today when we've been drawing. We do tend to draw small. I don't know why. But I think that is the next point. And then looking at outline, looking at what something looks like really. And then from that, looking at shade and how to then create light and dark and texture in things. And then I think from that, those are your basics. And then you can look at things like there's the grid method, which is something that I think would be for later on, Key Stage 2 for sure, which is dividing a page and dividing your picture up and drawing in that way. And but I think basically over time you want those skills to just come quite naturally to children, but it will be it will be something that takes a little bit of time, and just reminding them if you're doing drawing at the start of every half term, you're naturally going to get that progression.
Thank you. Amy said I would definitely be interested in some more support with assessment, so perhaps we could have a look at that at the next session.
Okay.
In terms of assessment. Carmel said, love the canvas idea. With the canvas, does the teacher start it off and add to it too, or is it all by the children?
So it's a guided piece, but it's led by the children. I mean, different schools do different things, but I would always recommend that like it should be tied in with the same skills that you're modeling that session. So for example, that polar bear piece, I modeled filling up a whole page with light blue lines, and that group, and then adding in the different sections for the eyes, the nose and the mouth, and then that group had to add those in on that canvas on that day.
That's great. Thank you. Tim says that the Henry Moore work is great, already thinking about how we can use Hatching and the work of John Hutton in a similar way. Tamara said, do you usually see both a sketchbook and an art book running alongside each other for all year groups?
A sketchbook and an art book. So in terms of an art book, what do you mean?
I don't know. Tamara, have you got can you unmute your microphone or?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Yeah. So what we have is a sketchbook, but we also have a sort of a larger art book where the pieces go. But what I'm finding is that can be quite restrictive, because sometimes the actual finished pieces don't always fit the size.
Yeah. Definitely.
So then we might, but it seems sort of too unwieldy to have a folder. But equally for the younger children, we're finding that we're not necessarily really using them both very much, because we're trying to use the art book for the good work, and then when to use the sketchbook. So I'm just interested to see how you see it running, really.
Yeah, well, I don't sort of have art. I wouldn't normally use an art book, so the way that the outcomes would be put onto a display, or if everyone had, you might have a big folder where everyone's work goes in after that half term's learning, but they'd have their sketchbooks, which would be the process, and then a photocopy or a photograph of their end piece with an evaluation, and then like their outcomes would go up somewhere with part of that process.
Yeah, that sounds better. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Tamara. We're getting close to the end of the session now. Perhaps one more question, and then if colleagues want to stay on at the end and just ask any more questions, then that's absolutely great. Got a question. What is the advice for projects if we have 4 sessions a term? So I suppose that's about lessons, isn't it?
So so in terms of time, how long do you have for those sessions? Is it an hour or is it an afternoon?
Is it Ariadina? Do you want to unmute, or are you able to stay on at the end and then?
She said an afternoon. So I think with 4 afternoons, you could quite easily do, because those sessions were based on an hour a session. So you'd get a slightly longer session in the afternoon, when you maybe an hour and a half, maybe a bit more even. So I would say that you'd probably you'd be able to get that done, I think, in 4 afternoons.
That's great. Lovely. Thanks, colleagues, for your questions. If you do want to stay on and just ask any more specific questions, that's great at the end. I'm going to launch the poll. So this was talking about next session. So we're coming together on the 4th of May in the afternoon, and very fingers crossed that that's going to be a face-to-face session.
Yeah.
So please do give us some idea about what you want us to focus on, or what you want Emma to focus on in that session. Obviously, these are some sort of key areas of art practice, but, you know, I'm going to put a link to the feedback form I'd like you to complete, if possible, in the chat. So if you click on that, you can write a little bit more detail if there's anything more specific that you want us to look at. And obviously, colleagues asked for assessment as well, so we can perhaps consider that as well as something. But if you want to just put your preferences there in terms of these sessions. Emma, do you want to say anything about any of those in particular?
I think from what I can see, I feel like sculpture is taking a bit of a lead there, which I think is great, actually, because I think that is something that it does need a little. It is something, if I was going to say, if any of the things need CPD, really, they all do. I believe they all do. But I think printing and sculpture are big in terms of you need that bit of guidance with it, otherwise you probably just wouldn't do it. And I think there are actually really easy ways of doing sculpture. I'm seeing textiles on there as well, which is another one which is always people do find a little bit of a challenge. But I do think for me, textiles is something that is not really my forte, but I have adapted to doing that in school. So I do have some simple ways of doing textiles in schools, but I often combine textiles with print and collage, because those are my more natural ways of working, as opposed to like sewing and things like that. There's no rules with these different things of what you need to achieve with textiles, for example. There's nowhere that says that you need to be sewing. Obviously, I think if you've got somebody in school that is fantastic at that, and then it's using the skills, maybe finding out as art leads which, who has these skills in your school, and you can always use those people if they've got time to support with those things. But I think that a lot of the same with printmaking. It's like printmaking is something that people really struggle with and do not usually do, because it seems really messy and really hard to do, or like maybe the idea of doing a monoprint is terrifying, or like what even is it? But actually, like, it's one of the most easy things that you can do with children. It's just a little bit messy, but yeah, you need someone to share that with you and show you how to do it.
I'm just sharing the poll results so everybody can see what you say. Emma, sculpture looks like it's real at the moment, so that's something we can look at.
So hopefully that'll be in person, because that will be one that is you want to be in person really for something like that.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to let people go now because it is 5:30. So thank you so much for your engagement, everybody. Thank you, Emma, for hosting.
Thank you so much for having me.
Making it really practical, even though it was online. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm going to post another link to the feedback form. Your feedback is so important to us to help to guide in terms of how we can make these sessions better for you, meet your needs even better. getting lots of love on the chat in terms of people getting a lot out of the session. But please do click on the feedback form, send us your written feedback. I mean, it's very, very short anyway. I can share that with Emma so she's got that, and then we can look at that in terms of planning the next session, which, as I say, 4th of May in the afternoon. We'll keep you posted, but hopefully it'll be online. Hopefully it'll be face to face during that during the summer term. But thanks ever so much. Just to remind everybody, I will be sharing, as soon as I've got Emma's slides, I'll share the slides. I will share the edited recording. I'll send you an email. It'll all be housed on the members area of our website, the Gateway website, and I'll send you an email to tell you how you can log into that to be able to access those resources. But thank you ever so much. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks so much.
We'll see you again.
See you soon.